Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember that context is everything. Context is Everything Media Network, the Ambient classroom, reading this history textbook cover to cover to build my historical context on this context is everything journey. Let's do a review of yesterday's reading. Yesterday's reading, the Holy Roman Empire. Pope Innocent III, we've been talking about him a lot this chapter. Pope Innocent III declares papacy as the sun and secular rulers, kings, as the moon, meaning the sun gives light to the moon, and the moon would have no light without the sun. That's a quote from Lincoln Park. If you can get the reference, leave a comment in the comments below. Power dynamics is what he's talking about. Sun, moon, power dynamics. Holy Roman Empire was in Germany primarily. They had desire to extend into Italy, and they did so. Holy Roman Empire, Duke Otto I of Saxony, in 962 was crowned emperor of the Germanic regions. Later, he was crowned actually by the Pope. So later successors of his, they said, well, we're the Holy Roman Empire. It's holy because the Pope named the emperor first. Roman because we want to follow in the tradition of the Roman Empire. Holy Roman Empire. Secular leaders wanted powers that the papacy had. Secular meaning non-religious. The papacy very, very powerful at this time. Secular meaning kings. Papacy meaning pope. This conflict resulted in the papal threat of excommunication or the interdict. We've talked about that 3 times. I'll give you a quick synopsis. Excommunication is for an individual. The Pope says, you're out of here, meaning you're not in the church anymore, meaning that you, if you believe, your beliefs state that since you're excommunicated, you're not going to heaven, you're going to hell. That's a big threat. Cosmic, massive implication threat. Powerful threat. Interdict, the interdict, even worse. So, say King John in England says, well, I'm not going to follow what you say, Pope. I'm not going to do it. Pope says, you're excommunicated, and guess what I'm going to do to England as a whole? I'm going to do the interdict, and I'm going to get all your guys out of the kingdom of heaven. And so, to the believer of the time, they would say, well, King John, please, don't submit us to eternal fire because you're being stubborn against the Pope. Massive power the Pope had, because he could just say, guess what? None of you are allowed in heaven. How about that? Well, you have to go to hell. He could just say it. So it was a big threat. Okay. Pope Gregory VII, talking about popes, led quarrels between the powers, the secular and the papal power, when he barred lay investitures, meaning secular kings appointing bishops to localities. Secular kings saying, hey, bishop, you're going to be in this area. I'm going to give you a staff with my crest on it. You're going to go here. And the Pope says, no. This is our decision, papal decision. Lay investitures. Henry II was excommunicated because he said, no, I don't like this rule at all. I want to name these bishops where I want them to be. And Henry II was excommunicated, but he found the loophole in Catholic Church where he said, guess what I'm going to do, Pope Gregory? I'm going to go to you with hat in my hand, and I'm going to go to confession and say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for offending you, and please just forgive my sins. And the Pope said, well, I know that you're lying, but I did do my sacred rites, and I do need to accept your confession. So he accepted his confession. Henry II went back to be the king then he later forced Pope Gregory into exile by marching on Rome. I think Henry II is English. I think he's English. He might be Holy Roman Empire Emperor. Maybe he's Holy Roman Empire Emperor. Holy Roman Empire wanted to gain lands in Italy. None were successful until Frederick Redbeard Barbarossa married his son off to Constance, who was the heiress of Sicily and southern Italy. Thus, Redbeard's grandson, Frederick II, was a Holy Roman Empire who clashed with a few popes and never actually won northern Italy, which was the crown jewel. Northern Italy, as you'd hear yesterday, northern Italy, wealthy. Southern Italy, not as wealthy. Sicily, not as wealthy. Holy Roman Empire had Sicily, had southern Italy for a time until France eventually won it. Southern Italy and Sicily, that is. Pope Innocent III, we've talked about him a little bit, declared himself an infallible ruler between God and man, meaning man cannot judge me, is what he said. Something like that. And he also threatened to excommunicate Philip II of France. Again, you can hear more about this if you go to yesterday's, where I read outside in front of a Starbucks in Hazlitt, New Jersey. I don't know. King Philip II of France was threatened with excommunication. He said, sorry, Pope, Innocent III, sorry. And they said eventually they shook hands, and they said, all right, let's go squash a rebellion against the Catholic Church and its corruption. And so they squashed the rebellion of the Albigensians. But then by 1296, the papacy started to weaken. So papacy starting to lose power, and we might be reading about that right now. I have these sticky notes that I've cut into the sheets. I'm only going to allow myself 8 things to write in the notebook, because these notes sections should not take 6 minutes and 30 seconds. They should take less. Unless you think that they're helpful and enjoyable, at which point, leave in the comments below. Please, for goodness sake, leave in the comments below. I want to know what the listener is thinking. And thank you, Mom, for continuing to comment. I really do appreciate it. It's a nice thing every time I log in. All right. Europeans look outward. Section 3, Chapter 9, setting the scene. Nearly 23 weeks after departing France, Count Stephen of Blois reached the city of Antioch in Syria. There, in March 1098, he composed a letter to his wife, Adele. He described the battles he had fought and the riches he had won. Stephen proudly told Adele that he and his fellow knights were full of fury and prepared to die for Christ. Stephen of Blois was one of thousands of Europeans who took part in a series of wars known as the Crusades. In these wars, which began in 1096, Christians battled Muslims for control of lands in the Middle East. As they streamed eastward over the next 200 years, in the course of the next 200 years, Western Europeans learned the world was much larger than they had ever dreamed. Their encounters outside Europe would serve to stimulate a pace of change. Okay, so Crusades, they're learning. They're going around, they're conquesting and learning. As we know, that is one way that the culture spreads, through conquest. The world in 1050, the beginning of the High Middle Ages. In 1050, as Western Europe was just emerging from a period of isolation, civilizations were thriving elsewhere. These civilizations are described in detail in other chapters. What follows here is an overview of the world at the time of medieval Europe. What follows here is an overview of the world at the time of that medieval Europe was first beginning to test its strength. During Europe's Middle Ages, Islam had given rise to a brilliant new civilization that stretched from Spain to India. Muslim traders and scholars spread goods and ideas even further. Trading caravans regularly crossed the Sahara in West Africa. Arab ships visited East African ports and sailed to India and East Asia. Although India was politically divided, it was a land of thriving cities. Hindu and Buddhist traditions flourished, and wealthy princes built stunning temples and palaces. Indian mathematicians invented a number of systems. a number system, which Arabs adapted and eventually passed to Europe. China had strong central government under the Tang and Song dynasties. China's culture flourished and influenced neighboring peoples. The Chinese made amazing advances in technology, inventing paper, printing, and gunpowder. In dozens of cities, traders used coins and paper money unknown to the medieval Europeans. Okay. I'm not going to note down all of those things because it seems like that's an overview, but I'm going to note down the thing about China. I'm wearing a shirt that was made in China, if you can't tell. I think it's quite evident. In West Africa, the Soninke people were building a great trading empire in Ghana. Its merchants traded goods, especially gold, across the Sahara to North Africa, the Middle East, and even medieval Europe. Across the Atlantic and the Americas, the Mayas had cleared rainforests and built cities dominated by towering temples. In Peru, Native Americans were building empires and creating great works of art, including elegant pottery, textiles, and jewelry. The civilizations of the Americas, however, remained outside the contacts that were taking place among Africans, Europeans, and Asians. Closer to Western Europe, the Byzantine Empire was generally prosperous and united. Byzantine scholars still studied ancient Greek and Roman writings in Constantinople. Byzantine scholars still studied ancient Greek. Constantinople. In Constantinople, Byzantine and Muslim merchants mingled with traders from Venice and other Italian cities. In the 1050s, the Seljuk Turks invaded the Byzantine Empire. The Turks had migrated from Central Asia into Middle East, where they converted to Islam. By 1071, the Seljuks had overrun most Byzantine lands in Asia Minor, present-day Turkey. The Seljuks also extended their power over Palestine and Holy Land and attacked Christian pilgrims. The term Suelgi comes to mind. I'm just going based off of my ear and memory of something. I don't know what that is. Suelgi Turks, but I'm seeing Seljuks, Seljuk, and that's how I'm going to pronounce it. The Crusades, new heading. The Byzantine Empire, Byzantine Emperor Alexius I urgently asked Pope Urban II for Christian knights to help him fight the Turks. Although Roman popes and Byzantine emperors were longtime rivals, Urban agreed. At the Council of Clermont in 1095, Urban incited bishops and nobles to action. "From Jerusalem to the city of Constantinople comes a grievous report," he began. An accursed race has violently invaded the lands of those Christians and has depopulated them by pillage and fire. Urban then called for crusades to free the Holy Land. And this is a different guy. "Both knights and footmen, both rich and poor, strive to help expel the Seljuks from our Christian lands before it's too late. Christ commands it. Remission of sins will be granted for those going thither." Yikes. Fulcher of Charters in the Chronicles of the First Crusade. So they're saying, you can do whatever you want in terms of sin. But if you fight for the cause of us fighting the Turks, you're safe in terms of salvation. So they're throwing salvation, they're playing salvation as a currency, really, to get people to do what they want. That sounds moral, right? Sounds quite moral, doesn't it? but I'm not cynical about Christianity the same way most people are. I'm much more thoughtful. Motives. Subheading under the Crusades. God wills it, roared the assembly. In 1096, thousands of knights were on their way to the Holy Land. As the crusading spirit swept through Western Europe, armies of ordinary men and women, inspired by fiery preachers, left the Holy Land too. Few returned. Religious zeal and other factors motivated the Crusaders. Many knights hoped to win wealth and land. Some Crusaders sought to escape troubles at home. Others yearned for adventure. The Pope, too, had mixed motives. Urban hoped to increase his power in Europe and perhaps heal the schism, or split, between the Roman and Byzantine churches. We'll talk more about that next chapter. He also hoped that the Crusaders would set Christian knights to fighting Muslims instead of one another. Victories and defeats. Subheading under Crusades. The first crusade came close to achieving its goals. After a long, bloody campaign, Christian knights captured Jerusalem in 1099. They capped their victory with a massacre of Muslims. And Jewish residents of the city. Yikes. The Crusaders continued off and on for over 200 years. The Crusaders divided their captured lands into 4 small states. The Muslims repeatedly sought to destroy these Christian kingdoms, prompting Europeans to launch new crusades. By 1187, Jerusalem had fallen to the able Muslim leader Salah al-Din, known to Europeans as Saladin. On the Third Crusade, Europeans tried but failed to retake Jerusalem. After negotiations through Saladin, did reopen the holy city to Christian pilgrims. Europeans also mounted crusades against other Muslim lands, especially in North Africa. All ended in defeat. During the Fourth Crusade, the Crusaders were diverted from fighting Muslims to fighting Christians. After helping Venetian merchants defeat their Byzantine trade rivals in 1204, Crusaders captured and looted Constantinople, the Byzantine capital, also the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. That's what it is, another name for it. Muslim armies, meanwhile, overran the Crusaders' states. By 1291, they captured the last Christian outpost, the port city of Acre, A-C-R-E. As in Jerusalem 200 years earlier, the victors massacred their defeated enemies. This time, the victims were Christians. Okay, a little tit for tat. Okay. Effects of Crusades on Europe. That's a new heading. Effects of Crusades on Europe. The Crusades left bitter legacy of religious hatred behind them. In the Middle East, both Christians and Muslims committed appalling atrocities in the name of religion. In Europe, Crusaders sometimes turned their religious fury against Jews, massacring entire communities. Though the Crusades failed to conquer the Holy Land, they did have significant effect on life in Europe. The wars helped to quicken the pace of changes already underway. Economic expansion. Subheading under Effects of the Crusades on Europe. Even before the Crusades, Europeans had a taste for luxuries from the Byzantine Empire. The Crusades increased trade. Crusaders introduced fabrics, spices, and perfumes from the Middle East to Europe. Merchants in Venice and other northern Italian cities built large fleets to carry crusaders to the Holy Land. They later used those fleets to carry on trade with the Middle East. Our word sugar, cotton, and rice are borrowed from Arabic and show the range of trade goods involved. Right, so conquest is one way that culture spreads, and conquest will also encourage trade. It makes sense that all of those things would happen. Crusaders further encouraged the growth of money economy to finance a journey to the Holy Land. Nobles needed money. They allowed peasants to pay rents in money rather than in grain or labor, which helped undermine serfdom. We already knew that. Or at least I did. Because I intuited that. Or it said it earlier and they're just repeating themselves. Whatever. Increased power for monarchs. The Crusades helped to increase the power of feudal monarchs. Rulers won new rights to levy or collect taxes in order to support the Crusades. Some rulers, including the French king Louis IX, led crusades which added greatly to their prestige. The Church, subheading, under, effects of the Crusades. The Church. Enthusiasm for the Crusades brought papal power to its greatest height. This period of enhanced prestige was short-lived, however. As we have seen, popes were soon involved in bitter clashes with feudal monarchs. Also, the Crusades did not end the split between Roman and Byzantine churches. In fact, Byzantine resentment against the West hardened as a result of the Fourth Crusade. Fourth! Jeez. A wider worldview. Subheading. Contacts with the Muslim world led Christians to realize that millions of people lived in regions that had never been known to exist. Soon, a few curious Europeans visited far-off places in India and China. In 1271, a young Venetian, Marco Polo, set out for China with his merchant fleet father and uncle. Marco Polo set out to China with his merchant father and uncle. After many years in China, he returned to Venice, full of stories about the wonders of Chinese civilization. Doubting Europeans called Marco Polo the Prince of Liars. Doubting Europeans called Marco Polo the Prince of Liars. He's a liar, they said. To them, his tales of government-run mail services and black stones, coal that were burned to heat homes were totally untrue. The experience of crusaders and travelers like Marco Polo expanded European horizons. They brought Europe into wider world view from which it had been cut off since the fall of Rome. By the 1400s, a desire to trade directly with India and China led Europeans to a new age of exploration. Reconquista, the Reconquista in Spain, Reconquista, Reconquista, the Reconquista in Spain. The crusading spirit continued long after the Europeans' defeat in Acre. It flourished especially in Spain, where Christian warriors had been battling Muslims for centuries. Muslims had conquered most of Spain in the 700s. Several tiny Christian kingdoms survived in the north, however, as they slowly expanded their borders. They sought to take over Muslim lands. Their campaign to drive the Muslims from Spain became known as the Reconquista, or Reconquest. Christian advances. Subheading under Reconquista in Spain. Christian advances. Efforts by Christian warriors to expel the Muslims began in the 700s. Their first real success did not come, however, until 1085, when they recaptured the city of Toledo. During the next 200 years, Christian forces pushed slowly and steadily southward. By 1300, Christians controlled the entire Iberian Peninsula except for Granada. Muslim influences remained strong, though, and helped shape the arts and literature of Christian Spain. Ferdinand and Isabella. Ferdinand and Isabella, subheading, under Reconquista of Spain. In 1469, Isabella of Castile married Ferdinand of Aragon. This marriage between the rulers of two powerful kingdoms opened the way for unified state. Using their combined forces, the two monarchs made a final push against the Muslim stronghold of Granada. In 1492, Granada fell. The Reconquista was complete. Isabella and Ferdinand tried to impose unity on their diverse peoples. They joined forces with townspeople against powerful nobles. Isabella was determined to bring religious as well as political unity to Spain. Only eight sticky notes. These are my notes now. I'm going to stop using this. I'm only going to write the notes in the thing for you. And I'm going to use these sticky notes to review. Isabella and Ferdinand tried to impose unity on their diverse people. They joined forces with townspeople against powerful nobles. Isabella was determined to bring religious as well as political unity to Spain. Under Muslim rule, Spain had enjoyed a tradition of religious toleration. That is, a policy of allowing people to worship as they chose. Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived there in relative peace. Isabella ended that policy of toleration. With the support of the Inquisition, the church court set up to try people accused of heresy. Isabella launched a brutal crusade against the Jews and Muslims. Often those who refused to convert to Christianity were burned at the stake. Yikes. The Queen achieved religious unity, but at a high price. More than 150,000 people fled Spain. Many of these exiles were skilled, educated people who had contributed much to Spain's economy and culture. Holy mackerel, that sounds bad. All right. As always, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything. Have a good weekend. Enjoy. Bye-bye. So long. Farewell. La la.